Hello fellow dragons, it's Shane from Astral Dragon Gaming, and yes, we're reviewing Sparklite. You know, it must be that time of year where every game is just a pixel art game that is got rogue-like designs in it. But anyway, some games are what they are, and this is the game that this is. So Sparklite is basically a roguelike game that has Zelda-like efforts. It has randomized structure contained within it, and it's all done in pixel, which pretty much says the entirety of the game. But why are we reviewing it? Well, we're reviewing it for two reasons. One, I like pixel games because I grew up on them. I grew up on the Atari, but you know, a lot of the gaming era that has always been near and dear to my heart has always been the consoles of the early ages during the real big console wars that were between Nintendo and Sega. But as the years have gone by, that has become a much different sort of marketplace where PCs are now sort of becoming the dominant race compared to other gaming systems, and the other gaming systems are now trying to play the catch-up game, where PC has been solid and still being strong. But pixel games are still, to this day, probably the most accessible and greatest games that have been made. Like, you only have to look at some great ones such as Stardew Valley. I remember when I first bought that and I thought, yeah, it's a great game, and I really enjoyed it. And then less than a year later, someone was asking me about it, and then it just exploded. And now, after that point in time, so many pixel games have come out. And Sparklite, go get the name right, has come out as well. It's not a very expensive game like many pixel games. It's a very adorable and easy to jump in and jump out game. But first of all, we'll just go through the basic graphics. So anyway, you play as Ada, I think, Anna? I cannot remember the name, isn't that silly? Anyway, you play as a girl, you basically get dumped in the world, and you've got a cute little robot as a companion, and you're there to save the other people, creating a better place up in the clouds. The basic idea is that you jump down, go through each of the zones, and collect all the components, come back up after you die, and buy stuff, get stronger, go back down, do it all again. There are dungeons, there are bosses, and a whole lot of things that are all sort of architecturally designed as normal sort of tropes for these kind of games. The one thing I think that makes this game stand out more so than the others is the boss fights and the animations that are contained within them. There is a real sense of weight with these bosses that I think is what really picks up the visuals for this game, that makes it very interesting in general, because you basically just got a glorified multi-wrench that does all the whacking and attacking, and it's very interesting how each of the boss battles are designed visually so that you can attack these bosses and know how to do them. Like, it's a basic boss design where you try and find the basic ideas of how to overcome the bosses, not by just mashing the button, but actually thinking about a boss as you come and approach the boss. But yeah, visually it's a very Zelda-esque game. Like, I'm talking the original SNES Zelda, or Super Nintendo, or Super Famicom, depending on which part of the world you are hailing from. But it's a really great sort of visual sort of idealism, and I really have grown to love this quite a lot. I've pretty much finished it. I've only got the last seal to break open in this game, and yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. So anyway, we'll listen to the sound and the music, and we'll get back to it. Sound-wise, it's a pixel game. There is no other way around it. There's nothing really to write home. I think the only real standout thing is, again, the boss mute sounds themselves as you're fighting them and attacking them. It's really enjoyable, it's very meaty, and it's very full of life and energy. The other thing that I talk a lot about it in myself is that it's so endearing, I think, is what the sound effects and whatnot for this game really make it. Because it's full of that sort of little kiddie kind of classic sort of bopping and hitting enemies, and the enemies disappear in a cloud of smoke, or items fall down in a certain way, or there's a sort of triumphant sound when you achieve things. It's all a very sort of muchness, and it's been done and dusted, but it's been done well here, and that's probably what is the more important thing to take home. It's not that it hasn't been poorly implemented, it hasn't gone and chose really bad sound effects or anything. It's very good sound effects. It's just, if you played one, you played them all, sort of thing. Music-wise, it's catchy, it's enjoyable, but it is a dentist drill drilling into the top of your roof of your mouth sort of thing, slowly over time, which a lot of background music is suffering from in a lot of pixel art games, and I really am getting a little annoyed at it, because it's one thing to embrace pixel art games, or it's one thing to embrace a standard 2D design game, but it's another thing to just leave it all as a very hollow and shallow sort of representation of what you're trying to achieve. The music here, it's great, but at the same time it is very repetitive, and it can slowly drain on your nerves and drill into your skull. So it's one of those things whether you're going to take it or leave it sort of thing. Okay, so last but not least, and most importantly, is the gameplay and the gameplay loop, which is the very important thing about this game. So basically the whole idea of this game is that it's a roguelike. You go down, you do your stuff, if you survive long enough you continue on. The minute you die, you go back up, you lose all your special items, but you keep your money, which is Sparklite in this game. And you can get to spend that on upgrades and various things that will help you as you go and progress through the game. The interesting thing about this is it hasn't concentrated on getting large quantity of items and whatnot. You actually have to finish dungeons to get said items. So you'll get into a dungeon in one of the 5 areas, and when you go into that dungeon you will get a schematic for a particular weapon, and you can get that schematic if you finish the dungeon with that weapon, and then you can rebuild it when you go back up top. And I kind of like this mechanic because these special weapons, it goes back to that kind of Zelda design where you used 2 buttons to designate what these 2 buttons did. So one did shooting arrows, one did a flying zeppelin bomb thing. And these sort of 2 buttons are the 2 buttons that you use for the speciality to allow for that. You use Sparklite energy, which you generate off killing enemies, to power these different abilities to use them. And I kind of really like it. It's a different sort of take, and it gives a more strategic sort of idea of what you're going to do and what you're going to upgrade when you go back to the base amongst the cloud up in the fortress back up in the sky. The other thing is the health bay, where you also upgrade and add little chunks to your multi-wrench. This is more an interesting sort of mechanic, but I can see it being very flawed. In order to increase your life, you need to add X amount of quarter hearts to your wrench, but that takes up space for your wrench to be upgraded with other items that can help you with your damage, your defense, finding special items, finding bosses, unlocking certain things. A lot of these things are all to do with patches that you put onto your multi-wrench, and I think it's a good idea, but at the same time it's kind of flawed, and I think that's where this game just loses a lot of it, and especially where you're dependent on the amount of health you put on your wrench, on how much health you have when you go down, and getting heal ups and stuff like that is extremely rare in this game, and especially when you get to the swamp section and it starts throwing acid everywhere, and it's very hard to sort of avoid that, and so you end up pumping more sort of hearts into your wrench, and you can get into a really vicious cycle. So I'm not a great fan of that mechanic. It's a good idea, but I think the ability to have more healing structures, or even an Estus fast kind of idea or something like that, would have been a nice added bonus to this in the very early parts to mid parts of this game. But other than that, that was fantastic, and it was enjoyable, but kind of sucky at the same time. It also, some of the patches take up more space or less space depending on how good or bad or what they do or what they don't do too. It's, yeah, I'm not sold on it, but at the same time it works, it does the job it needs to do, and yeah. So, overall this game is pretty damn good, but at the same time there are levels of caveats to it. Is it going to be a long game? At most, I'd probably see, if you won't churn through it, probably 10-15 hours at the absolute most. I could see people quite easily speedrunning this game to probably about less than an hour or whatnot. If they found exploits and whatnot, you could probably speedrun this down to about 30 minutes, maybe 20, depending on the gamer that was playing it. But yeah, it's a good game, it's just not the fantastic game that it should really be. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, please hit the like button down below. Also, hit the subscribe button if you want to come back for some more content at some point in time. And lastly, please hit the bell icon so that you can stay up to date with all my stuff. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.